If you saw the thumbnail, you'll know what's special about this particular gadget. What I have here is a fun variant on the Palm III that is probably pretty rare these days. It has a party trick. In fact, it has two party tricks. First of all, the case is transparent. And second of all, it can do this. Isn't that cool? I went to Java 1, a Java programming trade show around the millennium, and it so happened that Sybil Technologies had a booth there where they were demonstrating many of their new products. We use barcodes and barcode scanners quite heavily in the pharmaceutical industry, and at the time I was a software engineer developing in-house applications that relied on them. So this instantly grabbed my attention. Not only was the technology really neat, but who wouldn't be excited about the clear plastic case? When I got home, I contacted my Sybil sales rep, and I asked if there was a way he might be able to find that specific model. He explained that it was a salesman's demo, but if we handled it as a personal order, he'd see what he could do. It cost a couple $100 maybe, I don't remember, but it wasn't cheap. But a month or so later, I had the gadget, and it was kind of cool. Generation Xers like me will remember the original Palm Pilot. If you were a nerd or a geek in the 90s, it was the device to have. There were organizers before Palm Pilot devices. There were things like this from Franklin, and they were basically glorified calculators. They had clunky interfaces, and I never felt they were for me. The thing is, it looked like you had to do an awful lot of work to get your information in them. You would have to use your computer at best to enter all of your contact information, your cards and things like that. Or you'd have to key them in by hand. And it seemed like the thing that businessmen or salesmen who had lots and lots of contacts would be interested in, but it just wasn't worth it for me. The Palm devices, though, the Palm Pilot, had that special something, just like an iPhone, where you remember the first time you touched an iPhone where it was just magic. Everything just worked, it flowed. That's the experience that we had in the 90s when we first used a Palm Pilot. You didn't need to have somebody explain to you how cool it was. You could see right away that it was something that you wanted to have in your pocket. They eventually lost the Palm Pilot name due to a lawsuit from the Pilot Pen Company, but everybody still calls them that. The Palm III, which is what this is based on, is what I consider the quintessential Palm Pilot. It was the model that introduced the concept of beaming contacts and notes between devices over the infrared. There's a little infrared transmitter and receiver, kind of like what you see in the television remote, that you could hold this device up to your friends and press a button and send a contact card or something like that from your device to their device. This was in the 90s. It was pretty neat. My favorite of the bloodline would be the Palm V. Just look at that sleek metal body and the smooth curves. In my opinion, everything that followed just never had the grace of the Palm V. It was the first one that had a battery built in that was charged. That cradle that it sat in, you just set it gently in place. You didn't have to click it in or anything like that. You just set it in the cradle and it would start charging. You press the button in the center of the cradle and it would instantly wake up the hot sync software and would synchronize everything. It was magic. The cover that came with it was real leather, or it looked like it. It wasn't like this pleather thing which came with this one. It felt quality. The whole thing just oozed quality, and they probably lost money on it. It might have been a loss leader. Next year or two, they came out with this thing called the Palm 7, and it had a sort of mobile internet with a little antenna on it and probably $1,000 a month subscription. That's the way the internet was those days if you wanted to get on mobile internet. And it was always just the poorest experience. Web pages were text only. I don't know who used that. And it wasn't the killer app for the Palm device. They eventually came out with Palm M505. I remember trading up from my Palm 5 to the M505. And I was never satisfied with it. It actually sported an early form of color and accepted SD cards. You could move MP3s onto it to listen to music. The color, it was just passive LED. It was pretty neat for its time. It didn't show photos very well. You wouldn't even want to think that it was in the same ballpark as your cell phone display. It was very primitive in comparison. And the thing was thicker, and they had changed the connector to something that required you had to snap it in. It no longer would just rest in the cradle. Some of the things that made the Palm 5 so magical, they were moving away from them. And they never had a device as cool as the Palm 5. Some years later, we saw PDAs and cell phones merge into a few devices that included the Trio 650, and that was my first smartphone. I remember when I told a friend about it, and he nodded sagely, and he said, "That's the real deal you got there." He was right. Let's take a closer look at this device. It's really a Palm III at heart, with a symbol barcode scanner built into the end. You've probably seen devices like this in the hands of people who are handing you packages at the door. Those devices are different. They are ruggedized Android or Apple devices. They are light years beyond the capabilities of this Palm III. Even at its time, I felt this device was primitive, for reasons that become clear only when you try to write application code for one. Let me start by showing you the kind of scanners we used at work in the 90s in our chemical stockroom, managing the laboratory chemical inventories. We had a large facility, and we had tens of thousands of bottles of chemicals in our stockroom, and the scientists had hundreds and hundreds of bottles in their laboratories, and we had to track them for safety reasons, and also so if you were a scientist and you needed a bottle of 1, 2, 3, 4 hexamethylbutyl whatever, and you found Joe had it down the hall, you could find it in a database, go down the hall, tap him on the shoulder, say, "Hey Joe, can I borrow your what's it?" And he would hand it to you. You'd forget to tell the stockroom you moved the bottle. Eventually, the guys would have to go in and do an inventory. So what they would do is they would take these simple portable data terminals into the laboratories. I might have a slightly different model here, but ours looked the same. Our guys would take those scanners into a laboratory. They would key in the lab number, and it would scan everything in sight. Then they would come back, place the thing in a cradle, and they would run an upload process that would write the changes to our Oracle database. Then everybody knew those bottles were accurately located in whatever laboratory they were in. The scanners ran a version of DOS. It ran DR-DOS, and I remember writing the software for them using the DOS version of Borland C++, using the special libraries provided by Symbol to handle the scanner device. They gave you some sample code, and what you typically did was you took their sample application and you started fiddling with it and changing it, and eventually you morphed it into what you needed for your work. These were really easy to work with, in my opinion. Why were they so easy to work with? Well, they were just like our desktop computers. They had a single processor. They had programs that started and stopped and ran completely on their own, one program running at a time. They had a physical keyboard. They had a very standard programming model, and more than anything else, they had a perfectly ordinary file system with files and folders. You see, when Palm developed their platform, this platform, they focused on doing portable data assistant tasks in a very efficient manner. They wanted to be able to use lightweight hardware and synchronize the data as quickly as possible. And it really was the bee's knees. I'm going to show you when I demonstrate this. I'm going to demonstrate switching between apps, and it's faster than switching between apps on your iPhone. They really knocked the ball out of the park in designing for their use case. You place the device in the cradle and you press the button, and the hot sync software on the PC would come to life, and you would hear the sound. It would go ba-da-dam. Then it would do some stuff in the background for 20, 30 seconds, and then you'd hear ba-da-dam, and you knew it was done. While it was running, it was merging all the changes between your PC and your PDA. If you changed the record in both places, it would magically merge the changes from both. Occasionally you might have a conflict, but that was super rare. Most people just saw it work by magic. In order to do this, they designed an operating system that centered around application databases, not files. They called them application databases and records, and they were application specific. There would be, like, for your appointments, there would be an appointment record format. There would be a telephone record format, an address book record format. There would be a notes record format. There was no concept of a file system, and there was no concept of a file. In later years, when developers wrote applications that worked on larger files, such as Word documents, applications that would share with other systems that weren't Palm devices, they had to use libraries that would basically hack the app database record concept into looking like a file system. In order to store like an image or something that was of a decent size on one of these devices, internally it really would be represented as a whole series of application database records that were chained together. The way you wrote code for Palm devices was very different. There were multiple platforms. The one I remember was Code Warrior, and that ran on a Mac. And I didn't find it to be intuitive and pleasant. And I never really got the hang of developing Palm apps. I'm sure that had I had time and had this been a project I was assigned, this was a side thing at the time, I probably would have enjoyed doing them and would have learned all about Palm apps. But at the time, I couldn't quite get my head around it because we were so used to file-based systems, and to move into these devices, it was a whole lot of effort. And you not only had to write an app for this particular device, but you also had to write a conduit so that when you press the sync button, the conduit would run on the PC and would handle the moving of the data back and forth and maybe communication with your Oracle database. You'd have to write that also for your Mac. So it was something, and we had to do that with the older terminals as well, because somehow that data had to get onto a database. But for some reason, this seemed more of a challenge. The older terminals were much easier to work with, in my opinion. And then eventually Symbol came out with much more polished versions of this that ran on things such as lightweight versions of Windows. And they had development software that was more like Visual Basic, where you draw things on the screen and double click a button and it will show you the code that'll get executed when a user clicks that button. So much nicer than working with C++. It's really a hard thing to find people, even today, software engineers who know low-level languages like that and are going to be able to write a user interface for a device like this. It's a whole lot easier to find people who are able to use a tool that is similar to Visual Basic. With that said, let me give you a quick demo. So this is the device. I don't have the cradle anymore, though I'm sure they're available on eBay. Even if I had one, I probably would have to have an old computer running Windows 2000 or XP in order to get the HotSync software to run. Nevertheless, this gadget's still fun to use. They had the software to demonstrate the barcode scanner burned into the ROM. So even after 20 years resting in a drawer with no batteries, it still functions. If we look on the back, we can see, right there, you can see there's like a daughter board on the back. It looks kind of like the way RAM would appear in a laptop plugged into a little slot. And that appears to be a board that runs the barcode scanner itself. This would have been attached by Symbol Technologies to the main board that would have, of course, been the Palm III board. Then up front, we have the barcode scanner itself, which is going to have a little motor. It's going to run a mirror. The laser diode shines into the mirror flips back and forth to give you the scanning motion, the sweeping back and forth, and then there'll be somewhere in here, there's going to be a photodiode to pick up the scanned response. Isn't that neat to look at? I can look at this all day long. The Palm III device used AAA batteries. And you look in the back here, you see that it appears that they might go in the same direction because of the springs. Don't be fooled. They go in opposite directions. Then I'll grab the stylus. This was a ubiquitous item in the 90s. With all the Palm devices I had, I never lost mine. But even if you did, it wasn't a big deal. You could buy these at Staples or any other office store. So let's start it up. And it gives this initialization screen where you're going to have to calibrate it. So it tells you tap on the screen somewhere. You do. And then you see there's this little X, like a crosshair. You tap that. And then you go in the corner. Go down here. Go in the center, do it again, 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 and now it's calibrated. And then we put in the date and time. Surprisingly, this is Y2K compliant. Not really something you would take for granted for something developed in the 90s. It works just fine to set it to 2024. So go next, and setup is complete. Click done. This screen was touch sensitive, though in a much more primitive way than your iPhone. I could tap on like the calculator here with my finger and I would bring up a calculator like so, maybe a little harder. There. And you could tap this button here and that would take you back home. For most things you would use the stylus, and there was a way you could write using a strange alphabet they called graffiti, and you could use that to do, so you didn't need to have a keyboard. These 4 could be used to launch various applications. In fact, this one here is notes. Then we have to-do list, your phone list, and your calendar. And remember how I was saying how fast this operating system was for what it did? They designed this thing to be a speed demon. Watch how quick it switched between apps. Bang, 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 and bang. You would go between apps in an instant. And I don't have any data in any of these, but still, it's really cool to be able to go to your calendar, bang, like that. An iPhone can't do it that fast. And I'll go to the calculator, there, back to the planner. It's really neat. So let's go back to the application screen, and there's 2 custom apps that were burned into the ROM for these symbol devices. And the first one is called Barcode, and it's some kind of a demo of, it says receiving demo, and it doesn't really do much. You can scan things like, I'll just scan a bottle of water, and you do that, and it there, and the number appears. I don't know what else it does. I haven't really messed with it that much. Again, it's just a demo application, not really intended to do serious work. And I'll go to the other one, which is kind of cool, this diagnostics one. I like that one because it'll show you the kind of barcode you're scanning. So we click diagnostic barcode scanner, and now we can scan various kinds of barcodes. I'll hold it like this. There we go. And I've got a sheet of other barcodes here. So we've got, for example, you can see there's EAN 13, ISBN, ISSN, UPCA, UPCE. It doesn't seem to like that. EAN 8, code 205. This one it doesn't like. Likes that. Code 39, 39 extended, code 128. It's not going to be able to scan any of these two-dimensional barcodes, the ones that modern times we're mostly familiar with. You probably, of course, have seen, when you think barcodes, you really are thinking about UPC symbols, but these other kinds used to be all over the place. They would be on books, they would be on prescription bottles that would be all over the place. There are many different code standards, as you can see right here. And when I first got started writing software for these, the 3 of 9 or code 39 was king of the road, and you would see that on everything. We had a lot of bottles in our chemical stockroom that had come from mergers that had code 3 of 9 printed on them in dot matrix printer, really old school. And that had a problem in that you could get a partial scan and have half the digits read or 3/4 of the digits. And that's something you don't want to have when you're trying to say, hey, I scanned this chemical bottle and moved it to this laboratory. You really want it to be accurate. So we chose code 128, which turned out to be much more reliable. It would either scan correctly or it wouldn't scan at all. And we used that on almost all of our bottles. At one point, we ended up going to a code interleave 2 of 5 that was a very tight barcode because we had little tiny bottles. But other than that, we stuck with code 128. We had other issues that you wouldn't even think of that deserve their own kind of a video. You could imagine the problems involved in getting barcode labels to stick and stay on chemical bottles that are handled by chemists that have acetone and other solvents in their labs and fumes and all kinds of things like that. The labels we used, I was never really satisfied with them. We did the best we could, and most of the time we would wrap some Scotch tape around them to give them a fighting chance at sticking even in the harsh environment, because we still had to account for bottles when they were discarded. We had to go through before they left the building and scan them out. So having a durable barcode label really was a problem that was a tough nut to crack. I'm sure these days they have much better barcode stock, but back at the time it was it did the job, but imperfect at best. When this device was made, Palm was already on the way down. They had already hit their peak, and the other devices were starting to take over, and you could see the writing was on the wall. I thought this was just the coolest thing, and I wanted to like it. I really wanted to be able to program for it and to use this in our laboratories, but it, right from the beginning, was already late to the show. And the other devices that Symbol made overshadowed this. But 20 years later, it still works, and it's a fun thing to look at. Thank you for watching.